drugs, or ideas, what you consume influences who you become. On the Mind and Matter podcast, we learn together from the best scientists and thinkers alive today about how your mind-body reacts to what you feed it. Before starting Mind and Matter, I spent 10 years in academia doing scientific research. I got a PhD in neuroscience where I focused on neuroendocrinology and the neurobiology of behavior, and before that, I specialized in molecular, developmental, and evolutionary genetics. I use my scientific background to help parse and translate the information that guests share on the podcast. In addition to the podcast, I write long-form written content inspired by the show where I integrate what I've learned across episodes. I also have a free weekly newsletter where I provide you with upcoming guests, share links, and provide commentary on scientific studies and research that I'm reading, and more. Visit mindandmatter.substack.com to find all of my content.
Well, this is Dr. Richard Cytowic. I'm a professor of neurology at George Washington University. I am a textbook author and an author of popular works as well. My background also is in neuropsychology. So my interest in neurology is not in reflexes and pinpricks and things like multiple sclerosis, but about higher cortical functions. That is what makes us think and how we think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so you're a neurologist. So you've got a medical degree. Do you still see patients or?
No, I've been retired. I don't see patients anymore, but I still teach and mentor medical students at GW.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get, like, when you started neurology and when you were still practicing, was there like a specialty you had, a subspecialty? Were there certain types of patients that you did see?
Well, I put together what was called Capital Neurology, which is a collection of 10 physicians who are all neck-up specialists. So neurology, neuropsychology, neurosurgery, ENT, ophthalmology, etc. Because I also started out training in ophthalmology. It was all about, the higher cortical thinking. And so the kind of patient we saw the bread and butter, which was, migraines, back pain, seizures in young children, etc. I mean, that's the bread and butter of neurology. But I was always interested, and I became interested in what's called closed head trauma. I had a colleague who referred me a patient because he knew I did neuropsychology, and he said, "Is this woman for real? She was hit by a garbage truck as she was backing out of her driveway, and then she claimed that she couldn't remember anything. She couldn't even remember the names of her children, etc. And she had what's called GS-15, the highest governmental rating that's possible." So I saw her and did the testing. I said, "Oh my God, Joe, she's got a temporal lobe damage." And, I thought that was the end of it. But then the lawyers came. I thought, oh, my God, no. And so I was deposed, and I gave my spiel and why I thought this woman had brain damage. And it was Geico, the auto insurance, who was trying to fight this. And her lawyer said, "Doc, we have got to have you on the stand." And so he had me on the stand. And the dramatic moment of all that was when the insurance company said, "But doctor, her CAT scan is normal." And I said, "Well, a dead person has a normal CAT scan," and that did it. The judgment was $300,000 in the lawyer's favor. So that's how it became. And I thought, why don't these people have any kind of representative? Here are people they fall down the stairs, they're hurt in sport injuries, stuff falls on their head in the warehouse, and they really suffer. And yet they go to the emergency room and they take x-rays and says, everything is okay, so you're good to go. But they're not good to go. They really suffered severe closed head trauma. And I became very interested in that. And so I actually wrote a chapter about that, a chapter with with an ophthalmologist and a neurosurgeon about the sequelae of closed head trauma.
When you say closed head trauma, it sounds like you mean basically someone has a brain injury, but it's not macroscopically visible from the outside. The scans might look superficially normal.
Their skull isn't bashed open and all that. They've fallen down the stairs. They've had a whiplash injury from an auto accident. So it's not, the damage isn't obvious from the outside. And yet, all the damage occurs within the first 25 microseconds of that. If you have an impact, then the brain is shoved up against the skull, and all the damage happens within the first quarter of a second.
Wow. And so, yeah, I mean, when we think of brain injury, obviously you can crack your skull open and it's obvious just by looking with the naked eye, but you can also bump your head and, it's not obvious to the naked eye, but there's still shearing that happens, bruising, the brain is damaged.
This is the Sabrina Stritch was a pathologist who first described these shear strain injuries. Is that what happens is that the brain is accelerated against the skull and it's like pulling taffy. And you're shearing these neurons and all that. And this is what happens. We now know this from sports injuries. People make a joke about getting your bell rung. Well, it's not a joke. It's serious.
And, I think one of the things we'll talk about is, the brain can also be negatively impacted by things, even if there isn't overt physical trauma of any kind. And that's, in a sense, I think that's what your newest book is about. Right?
Well, thank you. Yes.
So why don't you just give us like a basic high level introduction to what this book is about? What's the general subject matter and why did you write it?
Your Stone Age brain and the screen age. Basically, the title talks about how to deal with digital distractions. Is that everybody admits that our attention spans have gone to hell, and yet they continue to focus and stare at their screens and do the endless scroll all the time, while complaining that they're addicted to their phones, and yet doing nothing about it to stop that addiction.
And I want to think about this historically for a minute. So, I'm sort of an interesting age because I am just the right age where for most of my childhood, there was no cell phones. I didn't even, have a computer till, I was in middle school basically. And then we got the computer. And then, when I was a teenager, we got the flip phones, regular flip phones.
Yes.
And then when I got a little bit older, then we got the smartphones and the iPhones by the time I was in college. And then of course we get social media and all of the internet-based stuff that's now packed into the smartphones. And then, of course, you've got, everything that we have today. So I sort of saw the full progression while I was still, young enough to be developing and all that. So I'm old enough to have lived a childhood without most of these
when it was
devices.
Quiet, yes.
Yeah. And then see them sort of all come online. And we all intuitively recognize that they obviously can be very problematic, especially for younger minds. The question I want to start off with here is it the cell phone per se? Is it the smartphone with an internet capability? Is it the social media applications in particular? Is one of these aspects particularly problematic for? No,
it's the person, it's the brain. These devices are fantastic. I mean, my smartphone is better than anything Star Trek could ever come up with. It's so much more powerful than the Apollo computers that sent men to the moon. But I'll tell you this. My late husband and I, we were in New York, and we only had track phones at the time because we didn't need to call anybody and all that. So they were just for the occasional outgoing call. And we were trying to find an address. And at that point, this is a city that's based on a grid, for God's sakes, and we couldn't find it. It's like, how stupid are we? So at that time, all the phone books and public phones had been ripped out. And we looked at each other and said, we have got to get a smartphone, if only for the maps. So we did get a smartphone. And within 2 days of me playing with it and scrolling, I thought, oh my God, No wonder these things are so addictive, because it's like a slot machine. You keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, waiting for some kind of hit. And so when do you stop? You don't. There's no signals ever to stop. So whether you're looking at TikTok or Instagram or whatever, you're constantly scrolling, and there's no break that says, "Hey, knock it off. Stop. You've got to rest now. That's enough." And so the tech companies are much better at distracting us than we are at protecting our distractible brain.
Mm-hmm. And, again, on an intuitive experiential level, we can all see that some of this stuff is happening. We all know that attention spans are being lessened, that our ability to sustain attention is being interfered with by this technology. But in neurological terms, do we know much about like what's actually happening to the brain that underlies those changes in our
Yes.
attentional capabilities?
These are behavioral addictions. I mean, we're familiar with physical addictions like alcohol and cocaine and methamphetamine and all that, but there are also behavioral addictions such as smoking, gambling, obsessive sex, shopping, etc. And so these kinds of behavioral addictions activate the same brain pathways as the physical addictions do. And so when young high schoolers say, "I'm addicted to my phone," they really are. And they can't stop. They're so addicted that they can't stop, just as any addict can't stop. They say, "Oh, I can stop anytime," except they don't or they won't. And that proves the point.
And what do you think? So I want to talk about developmental aspects of this.
Mm-hmm.
So most people are getting smartphones these days pretty young, certainly by the time they're teenagers, oftentimes even less than
grade.
that.
No, first grade. They all have some. Yeah.
So what are sort of the unique risks that are posed by introducing a technology like that to a very young mind?
Well, I think you need to understand that the brain isn't fully developed until the age of 25. And so young people don't have any kind of resistance to impulse control and this fascination with phones. They don't have the ability to control themselves. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and like, why is that exactly? Is there like particular parts of the brain or systems?
They're too mature. The frontal cortex isn't anywhere near developed. I mean, if you're talking about school age kids or
Mm-hmm.
even teenagers, I mean, the whole reason that teenagers are just so freaking unbelievable is that their frontal lobes aren't developed. And so they're full of drama and this and that, and their parents, freak out like, "How can I control this kid?" I mean, because for them everything is like crucial and immediate, and I need this now, and look what my friends are doing to me. They don't have the emotional intelligence and the resilience to counteract these forces that are very, very common in their lives.
And like, there's lots of statistics we could point to, but basically there's been a deterioration in mental health that's been going on for a number of years in teenagers, in particular, people in that age range. And it seems pretty obvious, and I know people have certainly written and spoken about this, that there's a connection there between social media, smartphones, and all of that. But what can you tell us there that's really concrete? How much of some of the mental health problems that teenagers and young people are having can be directly tied to the use of technology?
Well, you have, the increase of anxiety and depression. The smartphone, you're always, particularly selfies and Instagram, you're always comparing yourself. Your life has become one of performance rather than just being who you are. So you're always aiming to post the most wonderful, exciting, envy-inducing things that you can. Look what I'm doing. And so it becomes narcissistic. Look at what I'm doing. Look at me. And the problem is that 10 million other people are saying, look at me, look at me. And so you're competing against this unrealistic cohort of other people when you could just be being yourself. So anxiety and depression, and of course, especially in young girls. I mean, this is what the Facebook files showed about Facebook and Meta, is that the posts were particularly corrosive to young girls who, you know, were cutting themselves, starving themselves. The negative effects are really just quite awful. And yet nobody holds Mark Zuckerberg to account. Nobody says, oh, look what you're doing. And when he was asked, he reverted to the past tense, which is always an indication of evasion. And he said, oh, for how my products were used against me, I beg your forgiveness. Well, they weren't used against him. They were his products, and he did it. So that's just a whiny escape on his part.
And when we, so like, part of what you're talking about is there's like a social psychological component to this. The social media apps and the phones enable people to constantly be comparing themselves to other people and worried about their peers. And, obviously that's going to lead to anxiety and self-esteem issues, but there's also a lot of, what we might just call more physical or physiological effects these things can have. One in particular that I'm hoping you can speak to is just the effect of looking at the artificial light and being exposed to a different spectrum of light.
Oh, right. Yes.
How does that start to tie into brain health?
There's two aspects there. One is the fact that, our circadian clock in our brain is set every day by morning sunlight and by sunset in the evening. And so when you're looking at light, any kind of light after sunset, whether it's TV or just your room illumination, you are you're pushing back your circadian clock. And so when you have a screen that's just a few inches from your face, that's very, very bright, and these screens are very bright, you're really affecting your melatonin secretion and your circadian clock. So the other effect then is the wavelength component, is that these screens emit a huge amount of shortwave or blue light. That's the wavelength that first evolved when all life evolved in the ocean. That's the wavelength that penetrates the ocean most, where all life evolved. And so every living creature has a photoreceptor that is sensitive to light. And we're no different. And, even though we think that we're so sophisticated and modern and all that, we are still a slave to our biological restraints.
Mm-hmm. And so people single out blue light a lot, and they compare it to other forms of light, red light, infrared light, all that. Is there something, what is particularly problematic about blue light and the...
Well, blue light has more energy than other wavelengths. And this is one reason why it induces myopia in young children, because instead of going outside and playing, they're playing on their devices and games and all that. And so young children, there's a great epidemic of myopia or nearsightedness in young children because they're being exposed to this instead of going outside and playing. But in the rest of us, it would be great if we just had dinner and just chilled out. And if we wanted to relax, go ahead and watch TV. And in my book, I have a chapter that tells you how to set your TV to reduce the amount of light that you're looking at, because you don't need a whole lot of light coming from your TV, particularly if you're sitting in a darkened room. So, but a lot of people are just blasting themselves with photons, that is light, and blue light in particular.
Are you just referring to like the total luminance of a television, just turning that down?
Yes, the total luminance. And they're very simple measures that you can take that can reduce the amount of light coming to you by 40%. And the picture that you're seeing is just as good as if you had it cranked up all the way.
So even if you just turn down the luminance somewhat, that can make a big difference.
It became a huge difference. I mean, because listen, we all like to have dinner and we like to chill out and we think, okay, I'm going to watch Netflix. That's just human nature. So we have to deal with what we have. And so what I'm suggesting is that there are adjustments that you can make that are very easy to make in terms of the backlight, the luminance, the brightness, etc., that will reduce the excess light blasting on you before you go to bed.
Mm-hmm. So one aspect of this is, if I want to think about how like patterns of sensory stimulation affect the brain compared to other patterns. So like if I'm looking at my phone all day, obviously I'm getting, the wavelengths of light, especially in the blue part of the spectrum, that are coming from the phone. That's going to be different than if I spent the same amount of time outside exposed to natural sunlight. So you've got a difference in the spectral quality of the light entering your retina. But there's also going to be a difference in sort of the pattern and frequency of change and how my attention is being captured moment to moment. But so if I imagine two people, let's just say one doesn't have a cell phone at all, they're outside, they're doing stuff, they're looking around. Another person has something like a smartphone. In both cases, their eyes are open. Photons are constantly going into their eyes in both cases. But beyond the difference in the spectral qualities of the outdoor natural light versus the blue light coming from the phone, is there something about the sort of the pattern of visual stimulation that's super important?
The person just looking at the natural landscape is far ahead in terms of the benefit that he or she gains from it. The natural world doesn't have a lot of color variation in it, unlike a Disneyfied landscape does. We also don't see a lot of stripes in the natural world. One of the biggest stripes, seeing striped patterns. So you think of a department store, we've got the lights overhead in a grid pattern, and
hard boundaries between things.
Buildings that have a reticulated surface. When you're not looking at stripes, your visual cortex is much more relaxed. When you're looking at stripes,
when you're looking at stripes, it's generating different patterns.
So one of the most common patterns of stripe is text. And so if you're looking at text all the time, this is very distracting, and we see this in young children. Young children, when they learn how to read, see spot run. The text is very big, and there's not much in between the lines. And then eventually, we learn how to read very dense text. But when you do that for a long period of time, it's exhausting to your visual cortex. So one of the things for your person who's outside in the field or even on the street without their phone, and they're looking at the trees, the plants, the sky, they are giving themselves a visual rest. And this is something that I recommend all the time for people who are stressed out: is go outside for a walk. Do not bring your phone with you. If you must, keep it in your pocket. And if you have a brilliant thought, then you can dictate a voice memo to yourself. But and actually, I do this to myself. But you go out there and just look up, look at the clouds, look at the sky, look at the buildings, look at the tree, look at the other people, the dogs, this, that, the other. This is the natural world in which you evolved in. You didn't evolve in a world of screens. That's highly artificial and it's detrimental to you.
Mhm. How did I feel like a lot of people experience a big impact in terms of their screen time and the way they socialized and the amount of time they spent outdoors um, in the since the COVID era began.
Mm.
So when COVID happened and we were in the lockdown phase, people were stuck inside. They didn't see people as often. They probably just started using their phones more because they had fewer options available to them. Do you think that had a lasting impact on people? And
I think the whole COVID lockdown was horrible and had very, very negative effects. Um, yes, when you're looking at your phone and texting and all that, you're not socializing. You're just looking at a screen. Socializing means talking to somebody else one on one. And so my advice is to put the phone down, call somebody up, even if you're on your phone. Talking on the phone is much better than texting. And I think the problem with young people today is that they're terrified to engage in person. If the doorbell rings, they freak out. They don't know what to do. They expect somebody to text, "I'm here now," outside. So yeah, you need to engage with one another in person without these devices. These devices are like a really bad crutch.
mhm, mhm. how is so if people are staring at their phones and they're reading stuff, how is that different from like have you ever seen those pictures where it's like back in the 1800s or whatever, and it'll be like a train car and everyone on the train is staring at the newspaper and everyone's looking at the newspaper. They're not talking to each other. When text was developed, I imagine it was also a big shift for people because it was this new way, this new modality of obtaining information and occupying your time. Are there ways, so if I'm like reading the news or I'm reading text on my phone versus someone who's reading a magazine or a newspaper or something physical like that, are those things comparable or are they still very different from
No,
one
not
another?
at all. When
Yeah.
people were reading the newspaper on the train, they were there for a set period of time.
Mhm.
Okay, 30, 40, 60 minutes. Okay. They weren't reading the newspaper all day long and ignoring everybody else. They didn't have their face buried in the newspaper. So it was a temporary kind of thing during a time when, they were packed in together in a train carriage. So I think the analogy is really quite poor.
Mhm. And like, what do you think? So you mentioned like just with a television or a big screen you're watching a movie on, you can just turn down the luminance at night. So on the one hand, like it's not realistic to expect everyone to just stop looking at any screens, after dinner or whatever, but you can do things like turn on the luminance on a television set. Do you recommend doing that on your phone, like keeping the luminance low? Does it work to
Yes,
put
I
it in
have.
black and white mode and things like that?
Again, I have. Well, you can put it black and white mode. I don't think you need to do that. But again, I in the book I have recommendations for how to set certain filters and reduce your luminance. One of the biggest things you can do is to turn on the Tritanopia filter, the blue yellow filter,
Mm.
and reduce the luminance that you're looking at. So I guess this is a question of, do the least amount of harm.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like it's not just total luminance that does matter, but also specifically like
Oh,
the blue band of
but
light.
the total luminance does matter, but
Mhm.
also the wavelength composition.
Yeah, yeah. And what about so people are starting to use more often and talk more often about these like nighttime glasses you can wear. Basically, it's a pair of glasses, but instead of correcting a visual deficit, it's just filtering out more of that blue light. Do you think those things are a good idea?
Oh, you mean the blue blocking glasses?
Yeah, yeah.
They're useless.
They're
Uh,
useless.
they're useless.
Why?
In order to block out blue wavelengths to any significant amount, you need to have dark orange glasses, and they're so dark that you can barely see anything.
Mm.
So all these, all these things that say, "Oh, we're going to block out blueberry rays," they're just bogus. They can't do it.
So you're saying they don't block out enough to be substantial. In order to block out a significant amount of blue light,
They don't
you would
block
need to
out
be so dark you
anything.
couldn't really see much at all.
Yes, they don't block out anything. To block out enough to be significant, they'd have to be so dense and orange that you could hardly see anything.
Hmm.
I know it's fascinating, isn't it? I
Wow.
mean, but when you actually look at the actual optics, people make all these claims, and you think, okay, let's see, what are you claiming? And you look at, well, what's possible, and you think, no, 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 that's not possible.
Um, do you think so? What do you think in terms of? Well, I mean, obviously everyone's different, but like in terms of if you're thinking about this as a neurologist and
Mm-hmm.
from the perspective of the development of the brain, like if you have kids or you had kids, like what balancing realism with your biological and medical knowledge, when would you introduce things like cell phones and smartphones and iPads, and what would you
Well, the
yeah.
American Academy of Pediatrics has said no screens before the age of 6. And so if you're gonna introduce screens, then you should do it together. So if you're gonna FaceTime with grandma, you and the baby should do it together. Um, I often have said that the iPad is the worst babysitter in the world. When you put an iPad over a bassinet or an iPotty trainer or a car seat, that I think is a form of child abuse because you're blocking their developing central vision. A young child needs to crawl on the floor, explore, put everything in its mouth. They're having a visual apprenticeship with the world in which they're learning what corners and edges and people and things are like. And so when you substitute that for some artificial image, you're really interfering with that. And so, we're going to see what these kids' visual vision is like in the future. I don't think it's going to be very good.
Hmm. So you think just the raw amount of exposure we have to these blue light emitting devices will cause things like nearsightedness at much higher rates in the younger
Exactly. Well,
generations?
that's been proven beyond a doubt. Yeah,
Hmm.
we've now seen the higher incidence of myopia in young kids because they've been gaming and staring at screens for years.
Hmm. And is there like how much can you undo this stuff? So if a child or teenager is developing certain tendencies, certain deficits in their visual abilities, in their attentional abilities, and so forth, and then become adults, I would imagine it's kind of hard to wind that back.
Well, now you're talking about what I call virtual autism,
Hmm.
which is autistic-like symptoms induced by heavy screen exposure. And this phenomenon was first shown by pediatricians at a Romanian orphanage. And kids that had heavy screen exposure started developing symptoms of autism, which is reduced eye contact, reduced verbal interaction, reduced socialization. And I think every parent who's got a kid that they wanted to yank a screen away from, they see this, that you talk to them, call out their name, you don't get a response. You ask them a question, you get a grunt if you're lucky. You try to take the device away, and they have a meltdown and a tantrum. And what happens is that if you do take these devices away, is that within a few weeks, the symptoms revert, which never happens in genuine developmental autism. So
Hmm.
this is why I call it virtual autism. And there are places like Hillary Cash's Restart, which is a camp where kids are sent away to just be with themselves and their counselors, no screens, no TVs, no nothing. And they're forced, guess what? they're forced to talk to one another and with the counselors and the staff. And after just a few days, all the symptoms start to revert. I mean, it's like, like wax melting. Everything goes away.
Okay, so literally just taking a break from these devices can lead to substantial change in pretty short order.
Except kids don't want to take a break. They refuse to take a break, and parents don't know how to make them take a break. And so it really becomes then, how do you force them to throw that circuit breaker and make them stop with this nonstop screen absorption?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little out of my element here because I don't have kids, but certainly I was a child and I had siblings and everything. But when you say things like parents don't know how to force them to, the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, can't you literally force them to? Like my mom used to lock us out of the house and make us go outside.
Good for her. Good for her. Well, she was doing something very useful. No, but I've seen very educated parents who just look on as if they're helpless. They can't. Their kids got this game unit he's addicted to. He's even got a battery pack, because that shows you how strongly he's using this thing, and she can't stop him. And if she tries to, and she would say, Ricky, say hi to Dr. Sato. I did. Well, and without looking me in the eye, I did. I said, that's what you get. You get grunts and lack of communication.
Well, so the behavior of the child. Okay, go ahead.
I think parents really need to take charge and say, forget it. And parents say, oh, the iPad, it's the only thing that works. Well, yes, maybe for a while, but it's causing more problems in the long term than it's ever solving in the short term. So maybe find some way around the iPad in the bassinet, the car seat, and the potty train. I mean, there's this. Have you seen this thing called the iPotty? It's a toilet trainer that's got an iPad there, as if a kid can't decide when the hell they got to poop. I mean, this is something that humans have dealt with for millions of years, and now we have to have an iPad to help us do that. I mean, it's become, that's how insane it has become.
Yeah. And what is it like when we think about the human mind from an evolutionary perspective? Why is it that we are so easily captured by this kind of technology?
Oh, well, one other thing is the oriented rate. Well, we have evolved to notice any change in circumstances. So any novel situation snags our attention. It's what we call the orienting reflex. And so something new happens and we zoom right to it. And that's just how we're built. And evolutionary psychologists say, well, the reason that is that if you heard a twig snap, or you smelled a smoke, or something different happened in your environment, and all of a sudden you were thrown on high alert, because that could mean a predator was about to come and eat you or battle with you or whatever. So it's a survival instinct, and that kind of instinct has never gone away. It's why we jump at a stick that we thought was a snake. It's because our fast pathway thinks, "Oh my God, danger!" and we don't have time to think, "Oh wait, no, that was just a stick in the pathway." So that's what makes us react so quickly.
And one of the things that I think is important here is, you can be outside without a device, and you can be inside with a device. In both cases, you're experiencing what's in front of you. You're taking in information through your eyes, your ears, etc. But sort of the pattern of stimulation and the amount of crosstalk between the senses is probably going to be very different. So, the phones aren't just visual. We also hold them in our hands in a particular way. We use our thumbs and we feel. We can hear sounds coming from them, especially if we're listening to music or watching a movie on the phone, or whatever. So it's this sort of multimodal experience. It's not just a visual experience. And I wonder if the sort of pattern of multimodal stimulation that things like the smartphones are giving people, is that actually like sort of changing, especially if they're using them while they're young and they're still developing, is that changing the way that they actually perceive the world, the way that they see colors, the way that they perceive sounds and so forth?
What you're talking about is what's called the audiovisual model of virtual autism, is that instead of just living in the natural world, playing games, etc., these kids are exposed to high intensity visual audio stimuli, crosscuts, fast edits, etc. And what this does is stimulate sensory pathways at the expense of more emotional ones. So yes, so that's what this heavy screen exposure does. It what's the word I want? It stimulates. It adapts people to. It predisposes people to be sensitive to sensory stimuli, and that are coming at them at the expense of everything else.
Yeah, I guess that's where sort of the virtual autism analogy comes in, because with bona fide autism, it's often, scientists will often talk about that as being, there's an abnormality in the brain, whatever exactly that may be, and it's basically leading to sensory overload. A lot of autistic patients are essentially hypersensitive to sensory stimuli.
They can't handle sensory overload, right? And so yes, and multiple research has shown that there are difficulties, there are problems in the brain, particularly among the white matter tracts, and so people who have developmental autism are hypersensitive to stimuli.
And when we were talking about like sort of the mixing of all the senses and stuff, my understanding is also you spent, you've written books and you spent a lot of time in your career studying synesthesia, which is a really interesting thing. And I want to talk about that as well. So. Yeah. So just for people who don't know, what is full-blown synesthesia?
But everybody knows the word anesthesia, which means no sensation. So synesthesia means joined or coupled sensation. So there are children who are born with 2, 3, or all 5 of their senses hooked together, so that my voice, for example, is not only something that they hear, but something that they might also see or taste or feel as a physical touch. Now, they are shocked to discover that not everybody else is like them, because they assume everybody is this way. So one 7-year-old told her best friend that, "Oh, my A is the most beautiful pink I've ever seen. What does your A look like?" And the friend said, "You're weird," and never talked to her again. So you have this dichotomy of synesthetes saying, well, everybody does this, to thinking, oh no, I'm the only one in the world. And so there's this really intense sense of isolation until they realize that, in fact, there are many other people like them.
And so what are the most common ways that manifests? What are the most common senses that get coupled together?
Well, sight and sound are very common. But for example, the most common kind of synesthesia is seeing the days of the week as colored. And then there are colored graphemes being the written elements of language. So letters, numerals, punctuation marks, etc. And then after that are colored phonemes, or the sound units of language, the syllables, etc.
Does that actually cause people any problems? Do they have any memory deficits or any?
Almost never. Synesthetes love having their experiences and their sensations, and to lose it would be an odious state. And they sort of pity us who don't have, the rest of us who don't have synesthesia at all. Now, the only time that it is a problem is when it's bidirectional. And so I have to say that synesthesia, most of all, is a one-way street. So you go from you go from sound to sight, but not sight to sound. So you have colored music, for example. But there are people who go in both directions. And for them, it can be quite disorienting. There's a woman, she appeared in our BBC documentary. She's a music teacher outside of London she's been studied extensively, and she's got synesthesia in both ways. And she leads a relatively restricted life because of this. And so for the BBC documentary, she bravely she bravely agreed to come into Piccadilly Square at night where all the lights are flashing and the traffic's going. And you can see her there and she's saying, well, I see this, I see that. Oh my God. And then eventually I've got to get out of here. It's too, I'm going to faint. It's too much. So there are those. And there are other ones who have one guy who's profoundly hard of hearing calls he calls photonic hearing. So it's like looking at the red lights flashing on a tower that's warning at airport lines, and he drives toward it, and he can hear almost like a Doppler effect as it's happening. But it doesn't affect what he's seeing or anything else. It's just a phenomenon that he experiences.
And so even though we don't all have full-blown synesthesia, like some of these more dramatic cases, when we experience the world, our senses are in some sense always coupled to some extent. They're always correlated in very systematic ways. So, for example, even just talking to you or someone in front of me, I'm hearing your voice through my ears, but it's also sort of matched up in particular ways with the mouth movements you're making. So there's an audio-visual correlation there that
yes, well,
shapes my perception.
We're all synesthetic in some sense. For example, sight and sound are already so tightly bound that even bad ventriloquists convince us that the dummy is talking. And likewise, at the cinema, where we believe that this dialogue is coming from the mouths on the screen, not from the speakers that are surrounding us. Dance is another synesthetic coupling in which body movements imitate or mimic or parallel the musical rhythm that we're listening to. I should say that synesthesia is quite common. I used to think it was very, very rare, but it occurs in 4% of the population. So that's an awful lot of people. And that means that 1 in 23 people inherit the gene for synesthesia. But because it doesn't express itself with 100% of fidelity, a smaller number, 1 in 96, have some kind of overt synesthesia.
Are you saying there's a single gene that's sort of responsible for this phenomenon?
I use the word gene, but actually it's probably multiple genes. And one of the things that's been going on for the past several years is that researchers around the world have been trying to map genetic markers for synesthesia, and they've gotten quite good at it. But David Eagleman, my colleague who wrote Wednesday is Indigo Blue with me, I always tease him because he said years ago, he was going to just sort of nail down the genetic marker within a year and be done with it. Well, that was, 10 years ago, and he still hasn't done it. Nobody's done it. And I don't know when somebody will, but somebody will. We'll nail down the genetic markers for synesthesia. And the wonderful thing is that, when I started doing this in the late 1970s, everybody said, oh, this is bogus. This can't be possibly real. These people are making it up. How could this possibly be a real brain phenomenon? You better stay away from this. It's too weird and new age. It's going to ruin your career. Well, now we have young scientists all over the world. I forget how many continents we've counted now. They're doing incredible research, not just in the neuropsychology of it, but in the genetics of it as well. So I'm very pleased that I've caused this shift in thinking about how the brain is organized.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how much we understand about the developmental origins of synesthesia, and sort of to connect the dots between that part of your career and the new book. Do we know at all, like whether smartphones, digital technology, all the new technologies we're creating, is that changing the frequency of synesthesia or the types of synesthesia that are more or less common?
Oh, no, I don't think it is at all because synesthesia is a basically it's an autosomal dominant trait, and so the environment's going to isn't going to affect that at all.
Hmm.
Um,
So overt synesthesia's got a pretty strong genetic component.
oh my God, it's got a huge. I mean, it runs strongly in families. I
Hmm.
mean, one of the first families I was aware of was Vladimir Nabokov, the novelist, and his mother had it. He had it, and his son Dmitri had it. His son Dmitri wrote an afterword to Wednesday is Indigo Blue. I've had other families. I've got four generations. Um, David Eagleman, when he was doing started his genetic research, he and his graduate students crashed a wedding party, and they did saliva swabs of all the relatives there to see who had the gene related to the bride who was synesthetic. I mean, it's quite wonderful, and how clever people can be about looking at this stuff.
Hmm. Wow. Um, and so it's got this strong genetic component, but we're all sort
Very
of
strong.
synesthetic to some extent, to like the sort of background extent.
Well, we all are, except that we're not consciously aware of all of the cross connections among our senses. Um, the question isn't, do synesthetes have crosstalk among their senses? Yes, of course they do. It's just how much they have compared to the rest of us.
Mhm.
And I already mentioned, the sight and sound and ventriloquist. So, when we talk to somebody, we're also looking at their mouths. So that's sight and sound. And when we're at a noisy cocktail party, well, then the noisier it gets, the more we have to look at somebody to understand what they're saying. So, yeah, there's all sorts of sensory cross couplings that are going on all the time, most of which we are not aware of because they're so normal and taken for granted that we never even think about them.
Mhm.
There's also wonderful experiments about sensory substitution. For example, how we can get the tongue to see. So if you put an electrode grid on the tongue that's connected to a camera, all of a sudden blind people can all of a sudden navigate in three-dimensional space. And there's a famous blind individual, Eric Weimaraner, who climbed Mount Everest using this device. It's now called the BrainPort. It's commercially
Hmm.
available. So that's sensory substitution, substituting one sense for another. And the point being that, the brain doesn't care where the sensation is coming from. It's either from your eye or from your big toe kicking against a rock. You just put in the input, and the brain will figure it out.
Hmm. So hold on, you're saying with that device, you have a totally blind person, so their eyes don't work.
Mm-hmm.
They have a device that's taking in visual information, patterns of
Mm-hmm.
photons, but instead of going into their eyes and into their visual cortex, it's going into a stimulator that stimulates their tongue, and it goes in through the
It's
what would
going
otherwise
into
be
an
the taste system.
electrical grid that tingles on their tongue. The tongue turns out to be an extraordinarily good brain machine interface.
Hmm.
And that's the whole point, is that the brain doesn't care what the input is. You just give it the input and it will figure it out. And it's quite remarkable to watch people do this. And within just minutes, it doesn't take much training. Within minutes, they're able to, catch a ball,
Hmm.
navigate an obstacle course, you name it.
Wow. So totally blind. You just give them this pattern of stimulation on their tongues,
Yeah.
and they're behaving as if they could see through their eyes, basically.
And speaking of blind people, synesthesia is much more common in blind individuals than it
Hmm.
is in other individuals, because you've got all this real estate in their brain that's being unused.
Mm.
So there's no input coming to their V1, their primary visual cortex, and so that's available for other senses to input a signal.
Hmm. And so, okay, so like what kinds of synesthesia are common in blind people? Are there particular versions?
No, the usual kinds is that, is that colored hearing, colored music, colored time, musical units, etc.
And I would imagine, so that's probably especially common if you're like congenitally blind, you're born blind.
It's not particularly common, but it is synesthesia. I mean, not everybody who's born blind is going to be synesthetic. I'll
Hmm.
say that.
Hmm.
But if you are born blind and you happen to be synesthetic, well, then that's you're in good company.
Hmm. Hmm. What do you think? So when you think about getting back to the effect of technology on the developing brain, you talked about how young people today have certain attention deficits, they have certain
Mm.
social deficits much more frequently than people used to have. When you think forward like 10, 20 years, you think forward like a generation, are you concerned about what things are going to look like when, the kids that are just growing up or are about to start growing up become adults and have to start running things?
Well, I don't know what things are going to look like in 10 or 20 years from now. I couldn't have predicted in 1980 what things are going to look like in 1990. So I think it's really hard to predict about the future. What I can say is that I am concerned about um, short sighting kids in the natural world. Is that mothers are always right. You need to go, your mother was right. You need to go outdoors and play. You need to ride your bike. You need to do this, that, and the other. You need to get off your gaming console and get out there. You need to talk to your friends in person. These are important skills. I mean, this is one of the things that the pandemic really um, affected me by because I'm in Crestwood area of DC. I live right. We back up on the Rock Creek Park, a national park, and we have a beautiful alley. And we would be out there in the morning, and kids and parents would be walking their dogs and riding their bikes and all that jazz. And the pandemic came by, and there they were with their masks on, and I said, I'm really worried that they're not going to school. They're being deprived of the socialization that takes place in second, third, and fourth grade with their peers.
Mhm.
How are they going to learn how to do that? And the answer is that they never learned how to do that. And that's why these kids are so stunted socially.
Hmm.
They don't know how to make small talk. They don't know how to engage with other people. They retreat to their devices because that's like their security blanket.
Hmm. So the virtual learning, the non-in-person learning, you think that's basically had a very negative
I
impact?
think it's been awful. Yeah. And parents saw this. When parents were at home and they saw what their kids were being taught at school, they became furious. Like, what the hell is this shit that's going on? That's why this whole anti woke stuff began. It's like, what are you teaching our children? Forget it. Who
So you're saying a side effect of the virtual learning was, parents couldn't go into the physical school all day long and see what was happening, but now that it was happening at home on the computer, they could see like what was happening.
they could see exactly what was happening, and they became very alarmed by that.
Hmm. Interesting. Do you think so? Do you, is that something that can be recovered from, or are those kids just sort of permanently
No,
losing that window of time?
there are critical windows in which one learns certain skills, and once those windows close, you can never regain them. So I think a lot of social skills are lost on those kids, and no amount of tutoring or whatever is ever going to get it back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I blame the politicians who foisted this on us.
Hmm.
It was a very ill-conceived social experiment, and it's had devastating effects.
And you think those could be lasting effects for some kids?
Oh yes, yes, absolutely.
What
Sorry to say that, but
Yeah.
yes, I do.
No, it's worth saying because, because it's, if that's true, then we have to know about it. And there's no question that virtual learning is not the same as in-person learning. Like that's preposterous to think.
You're referring to or you're alluding to the famous Heldenheim experiment of the gondola kitten.
I don't know that. What is that?
Well, it's famous. And so there's two kitten litter mates, and one is suspended in a gondola contraption that follows all the movements of the free moving kitten. And at the end of it, the suspended kitten has learned nothing and is as blind as it was when it was born. It hasn't developed any vision whatsoever, despite having seen everything that the free-ranging kitten has. Now, fast forward to a modern version of that, in which a Chinese-speaking nanny was filmed so that another kid would see everything that her charge saw. Well, the nanny's kid picked up quite a lot of Chinese, whereas the other one didn't learn anything whatsoever.
Wow. So you're saying, so yes. I just want to make sure I'm following. So with the kitten experiment, you're saying, so like when a kitten's born, just like when a baby human's born, their vision's probably very blurry. It takes time for their visual system.
They're quite blind at birth.
Yeah. So you have a regular kitten walking around and explores the world, and its visual acuity develops and it sees like a normal cat. But if you have another cat and it's sort of suspended and it's moving around like the other cat, seeing all the same stuff, but it's suspended. Exactly. So it's not actually moving its own body. Its vision doesn't actually develop.
Not at all.
Even though its eyes are open and it sees the same stuff.
Not at all. Yeah.
So in the human experiment, you're saying basically you have a Chinese nanny physically interacting with the child, speaking Chinese. The child learns how to speak Chinese. But if a child simply sees the audio video of the same nanny, the same amount of time, same amount of language exposure, but not in person, they simply just don't learn it.
Exactly. So the second child that just watching a video of the nanny and the child. So passive learning is no learning whatsoever.
Yeah. It's like if I watch basketball all day long, but I never pick up a basketball.
You'll never learn. Yeah. You never learn how to, shoot those hoops.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. What, I'm sure like most of the book contains lots of stuff like this, but if you had to distill things down into like a couple simple tips you would give people for how to regulate their screen time, knowing that, on the one hand, we've got to balance the reality that, no one's going to completely give up their phone and their computer and move to a cabin in the woods. What are the simplest ways that people can realistically regulate themselves when it comes to things like smartphones?
First is to acknowledge that the brain operates within a fixed bandwidth of available energy. And no amount of diet, exercise, Sudoku puzzles, and supplements is ever going to be able to change that. So to try to push through with a pot of coffee or willpower is a losing proposition. So we're playing a rigged game and we're losing because the tech company's ability to distract us is far stronger than our ability to resist distractions. So what can we do? Well, we can turn the phone off if you're willing to do it, but most people aren't. You can put it face down for a few minutes, but most people aren't willing to do that.
I do that all the time. That's my
default.
Then
bravo.
It works pretty well because you simply just can't see the notification.
And the other is to set times. So, for example, I look at my email at 4 a.m. and 4 p.m. And after that, you can't reach me. I'm just off the net. So what do I want to use my screens for? Well, I like to read the newspapers in the morning and maybe in the evening when I have a cocktail. And so, I read the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Atlantic. I mean, that's pleasurable. but I'm not following the latest hoopla on Instagram and Facebook and the news. Most of the news is not worth following. So I think just real. So I guess ask yourself, what do I want out of life? Do I want to be distracted all the time, or do I want to be in charge? And so there are ways that you can be in charge, starting with, as you do, putting your phone down, turning it off, assigning certain hours where you're going to look at it or not look at it, and spend your time doing something else that's more productive, whether it's going outside, cooking, knitting, exercising, lifting weights, you name it. What are the things that really make you feel good about yourself and productive about your day? I would venture that looking at your phone is not one of them.
Are there any final thoughts you want to leave people with, or anything you want to reiterate from what we talked about today?
I think you need to be vigilant. You need to be in charge. These companies are so strong and powerful that you have to find ways to say no to them, or at least to minimize their influence in your life. I mean, these devices are fantastic. There's no question about it, but they can't be at us every moment of the day. There's got to be some balance.
All right. Well, this has been fascinating. Do you want to take a second just to remind everyone about the new book and when it comes out and all that stuff?
It's called Your Stone Age Brain in the Screen Age. It came out on October 1st. It's available on Amazon and everywhere that books are sold. And I hope that you will read it. There's lots of information in there, 400 pages of stuff that you never knew you needed to know.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll put a link and stuff in the episode description for people. But again, yeah, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Been fun.
This episode is supported in part by Athletic Greens. Their main product, AG1, is a comprehensive and convenient daily nutrition product containing 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients with less than 1 gram of sugar per serving, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything. It's gluten and dairy free and compatible with paleo, vegan, vegetarian, and ketogenic diets. AG1 is a quick and convenient way to supplement your diet to help ensure your body is getting the nutrients it needs. It comes in powder form, and you can mix it in water and drink it, or you can put it into a smoothie or a shake or something like that. I mix it into water and drink it, and it's super convenient. If you go to athleticgreens.com/mindandmatter, Athletic Greens will give you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Their vitamin D product comes in tincture form, so you just take 1 drop each day. A large fraction of the population is actually vitamin D deficient, especially in winter months when we get less sun exposure, and vitamin D is super important for the proper function of the immune system and for a variety of other things. So visit athleticgreens.com/mindandmatter or click the link in the episode description. You'll get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D with your first purchase.